So I'm going to do the stripping first on my piece. So I'm going to do the stripping on the front of the cabinet and the drawers because that takes longer to do. So I can leave that to process and then be doing the sanding on the rest of the cabinet. I'm going to show you how I strip wood to get a really nice fresh bare wood so that I can refinish it, put a design over it. So I'm currently using this paint and varnish remover from Home Strip because it's pH neutral and it's alkali. You can use it inside, it hasn't got any nasty fumes or anything, and it's really effective. So that's the one I'm using. It's really easy, this process, I think, and it saves you a lot of effort. I mean, think about sanding and how hard work that can be. This is just going to take the finish off in one go. You just have to give it a little bit longer. So that's why I'm going to do it before I do any more and do any of the sanding on that, because I have to leave it and you may need to put a little bit more on and then leave it again. Before you get started, just have a think about, have you got any areas that you need to protect from the stripper? Now, as you can see here, the inside of my doors is not particularly pretty. So they're going to need sanding back or painting to make them look nice. So I'm not too worried if I get any stripper on there, but if you've got quite nice wood inside and you want to keep it, what you want to do is go and put some masking tape on and just fit that around the edges to protect them. And then go all the way around. Just get a little craft knife and then you can cut that smartly around the edges. Or, should you want to save the edges, you could put your masking tape along there instead. But as you can see here, I actually want to put stripper on that because that's really old dark varnish, so I want to get that off, and the same on here as well. Also, my table is a bit old, but if you're working on a surface that isn't, you might want to raise this up. So you could just use a couple of boxes or cans or something, just to get that off the surface so you don't get stripper that drips onto the surface below. So let's get this on. Now I've got a big tub here, so it's easy for me to work from the tub, but if you get a smaller bottle, because there are quite a lot of different brands out there, I suggest you decant it so that you can apply it easily. So you would pop that, I just use a little glass jar or something. Because of the way that paint stripper works, it actually hydrates the finish. It rehydrates it. So basically that never dries out. These are the brushes that I use for paint stripper. They just live in there all the time because they never dry. So I would decant it into a little container so you can start to work with it. So I've just got two different size brushes. I might use a smaller brush for the edges and a larger brush for the top. And then the idea is that you just put it on quite thickly. You don't want to brush it out so that it goes clear or thin. I want to almost sort of blob it on, for want of a technical expression. It sort of gives it more coverage. So I don't want it to be too thin in areas. I'm just going to come back over those. And then I can go around. That's actually raw wood there, so that's not a problem. If you're doing this somewhere really warm, or if you're lucky enough to be doing it in the sunshine, you might want to think about putting some cling film or shrink wrap or what have you over the top, which will keep it processing and stop it drying out before it's had time to do what it needs to do. I will leave this, I generally leave it for at least 30 minutes, come back and have a check. But a good rule of thumb is I'll leave it for, if I can, an hour. And then I'll give it a little scrape, and if it needs a bit more, I'll put some more on, but we'll show you that after we've left it on for a little while, how you can judge if it's ready to come off or not. Okay, and then it's just a bit more. So nice and thick. Get the little one and do my edges. Same sort of thick consistency. I think it's just the top edge as well that I want to do. I haven't decided yet whether this will be left natural wood or painted, the top edges and the side edges. It can sometimes depend how close fitting your drawers and your doors are as to whether you want to paint them, because it can make them stick. But I'm going to strip that old varnish off either way. And then decide. Let's have a little look at how this is getting on. See that it's cracked and crazed across the surface, which is good. It means something's happening. So I'm just going to try a little bit and see. And actually I can still see it's gone through to the wood there, but it's still a bit sticky there, and I would have to scrape that. It's just seeing how easily I can scrape it off. Or do I want to put a little bit more on, then it might scrape off even easier. I think it might just need a little bit more on top, and then it will be just an easy pass rather than having to actually try and scrape it off bit by bit. So I would just add some more, and it might not need very long. I'll come back to it in about half an hour. Each finish is different, depends what it was originally. Some things come straight off and some things need a couple of coats. And if you've got different paints, like maybe gloss and emulsion, it will go through each coat separately, so you just have to gauge it. But do the edges as well. Okay. I'll come back to it. We're back. It's been another 45 minutes after the second application. So you can see that's started to crack up as well. So I think we're going to be good to go now. I have another paint tray with foil so that I can get rid of all of this goo, but without having to waste lots of things like paper towels and etc. I can just throw that straight away. And then I've also got a scraper and a little slightly different one here, which is quite good for curved edges and little details. I'll start with the big one. And I'm going to do this all in the direction of the grain. Now, if you've spotted any bits of cracked veneer or any little areas to be concerned about, just try to be aware of those as you go through. You don't want to be pushing too hard. You might have to be a little bit gentle with those. So I'm just going to start at the edge. Now, I'm saying go with the grain. My grain actually goes across this, to be honest. So I'm just going to then scrape that into the side of my tray like that. So whether I go across, which is unusual, most of my pieces do go up and down. Let's do that. It's not a sort of absolute must, but I just think if you do catch it, at least any scratches you make will be in the right direction. So let's just do that. Just watching those edges as well in case I lift anything. So not scraping hard, you're just literally taking the product off. You see that's coming off. It's not too gooey. That's why I like this particular brand, because some of them are quite drippy. That's actually quite satisfying. And when you get your sort of technique nailed, you find it's a really easy process and it takes a lot of the effort out of stripping things. So definitely not one to be afraid of. Just be careful there. I've hit something there. I think I've got a little nail there. So that's why I'm saying being careful. Can vary what you actually end up with your stripper at the end, whether it's very dry or very wet, but So don't worry if yours is different. It might just be you've got a different finish on your piece. There. That's all off. If you're finding there's patches that still are shiny and stuck down, you can put some more filler on them, you can put some more stripper on them and leave them longer. Or you could just let it dry out and maybe sand those, because when I'm finished, when this is all dry, it does need a little sand just to get the last sort of residue off and to even it up. So you can use the little, if you've got a curved area, you can use these smaller ones to get that off. So once I've got the bulk of it off, that's not as easy as this one. It's making a slightly different noise. It's the top edge. You can still see that I've got some sort of sticky residue to deal with. So that's when I actually go to the scrubby again. Let's just... And for this, I'm actually going to put some gloves on, but it's not because it's particularly nasty, it's just sticky and it gets, can get everywhere. So I just want to protect my hands from getting all covered in goo. And then what I've got here is just some clean water and the scrubby again, with a little sponge inside. And what I like about this, it gathers up. Instead of it sticking on the surface, when you use a different sort of sponge, you end up with a layer of stripper. It actually goes inside. And then, as I said, you can put it in the wash afterwards. So it feels like you're not wasting as much stuff, but it actually lifts that excess off nicely. And I'm going to go in the direction of the grain again, although these are quite, they don't scratch really. Try not to put too much water on the surface. We don't want to loosen the glue or weaken the glue that the veneer is attached with. So I'm wringing it out before I start. Hold that down. The particular reason why I like these, rather than anything that's made of metal, is, well, wire wool, for example, it can break and it can go into the grain, which can then rust and leave you with black spots, which I've found out the hard way. So now I use something like this. Your pan scourers, your metal ones, your non-rusting, sort of stainless steel ones, they're just a bit too, they scratch a bit too much for something like this. So this is why this is a good option. And then I can just go down the sides again. You keep rinsing it if you need to get some of that excess off, but that's actually come off quite nicely. Just maybe a little bit more there. That's where looking in the light can really help. But really, for the effort that's taken, think about how long that would take you to sand. And what I'll do next is leave it to dry. I always leave them to dry overnight. So I've got the drawers to do as well. Leave those overnight. And then the next day, what I'll do is I will give it a light sand, because this water will have, might just give that a little dry as well because it's a little wet. The water will have raised the grain. So I'll give it a little sand, which also will take off any last little bits. Sometimes you get a little bit extra around the sides that you need to get off. And usually with a 180 is enough just to smooth it out. If there is a bit more left over, you might have to go to a 120 and then back to your 180. But it's pretty much good to go. What I like to do when it's dry and I've sanded it and I've tack clothed it and it is ready to go, is just to give it a go over with a little bit of white spirit. And that gives you, well, it gives you two things. It shows you where there's any finish might be left, which is going to stop your top coat absorbing properly. So when I've done one of these cabinets with a nice design, put my top coat on, if there's any bits of finish, it's going to show. So your white spirit will not absorb, which is really handy sort of indicator. Also, it'll show you what colour your wood is going to look like when it's got a finish on at the end, with most finishes anyway. So you get a sense of what the tone of the wood is going to be, what the colour and the depth is going to be if you apply white spirit to the wood once it's stripped. So it's a really useful little thing to do at the end of the process. And then if you don't like the colour of the wood when you do that, then you can think about whether you're going to stain or use a different kind of finish to get a different effect. And we can cover those in the later sections. In case you're curious about cabinet scrapers, I thought I'd just quickly show you a couple of different kinds. This is a more traditional cabinet scraper. So it's literally a piece of steel, and you actually have to grind that to a sharp edge using a whetstone. So it does take a little bit of maintenance to look after that, and that is basically, the idea is you can literally scrape the finish off by hand. So you would hold that and scrape it up and down essentially. But what's a little bit more convenient is to use something like this, which is a carbide paint scraper. So it's a little bit more user-friendly, a bit more comfortable to use, and it's already got a pre-shaped blade on it, which you can easily replace once that's used up and once it's gone blunt. Now, from using these, I find they're better when you've got a more a thicker finish, basically, something that you can really scrape off, something that perhaps has already started to break up a little bit and you're not trying to get through it with the blade to start with. Something like that, I'd probably go to a paint stripper first to get through a really thick layer, and then the really thick stuff, that's where the heat gun comes in useful. But I just thought I'd just give you an idea of what you do with this. Now, this isn't perhaps the best angle. I'd probably do it flat down so I can get my arm behind it, but I'll just give you an idea. Now, I should say you would probably wear a mask for this, because what you can see is the powder of the old finish flying up. So again, a mask is essential for this kind of thing. As you can see, it's taken the finish off. You're getting quite a good take off there. There's areas where you can see still the old colour. But what you'll also see in the dust that it creates is very, very fine shavings of wood, which when you're working with veneer, for me, is not really what I want. I don't want to get that veneer any thinner than it already is. So this is why I say this is better for something with a slightly thicker finish than I've got here. This is quite a thin one, and it's come off quite nicely with stripper. So it's something to have in your kit, but isn't necessarily useful for every single scenario. And certainly if you've got stain, where this one has, something like a paint strip is actually going to cleanse and clean out the wood better than this will. This doesn't actually take away any colour that's in the wood, it's just literally scraping the surface.